Jerusalem has endured centuries of ruin, conquest, and judgment. But what is happening now does not feel like a repeat of history. The ground shifts without shaking, then falls without warning. Hairline fractures forming beneath its seal, sounding as though pressure is speaking without permission to open. And above the city, the sky no longer remains distant. These are not separate anomalies, nor symbols drawn from a rumor or theory. Stay with us, subscribe, and like this video. Because remaining watchful now means not to let things pass unnoticed. Reports from Jerusalem surface about roads beginning to bend with a subtle defiance of straight lines. Stone steps that had aligned for decades appear fractionally displaced. Walls do not fall, yet their geometry no longer agrees with itself. Surveyors mark points that no longer return the same measurements twice. What unsettles observers most is what does not accompany the movement. No seismic activity is recorded. No tremors register on monitoring stations. No aftershocks follow. The motion is slow, almost restrained, deliberate enough to suggest intention rather than accident. Hours pass. Days pass. The displacement continues, measured in centimeters, not meters, as though the land is adjusting itself rather than breaking. Scientists speak cautiously. They point to pressure without release, stress without vibration, weight redistributing itself through layers never designed to bear it this way. Models fail to reconcile force without fracture. The assumption that stability announces its loss with noise no longer holds. In Jerusalem, the ground does not split open. It drifts, and in that silent movement, something older than infrastructure begins to give way. Without an earthquake, without a seismic prediction, it's just falling. Witnesses from multiple districts across Jerusalem were then quickly transferred, they added. Sinkholes and partial cave-ins appeared without seismic warnings. No tremors precede them. Monitoring recorded stations show no earthquake activity, no shock waves, and no recognizable tectonic trigger. The ground failed without the language of shaking, leaving engineers and geologists with an unsettling absence of cause. What drew particular concern was where the instability occurred. Several collapses formed near zones, known for dense, ancient stone layers, areas long considered among the most stable foundations in the city. These were not loose soils or modern backfills, but ground thought to be compacted by centuries of weight, history, and construction. Yet even there, fractures spread. Observers noted that the pattern did not resemble surface erosion or rainfall damage. Instead, the ground behaved as if pressure were being released from below rather than forced from above. Cracks radiated outward without a central point of impact. Some widened slowly over hours, others appeared overnight, disrupting areas previously mapped as geologically secure. No single fault line could account for what was unfolding. The events did not align along known seismic boundaries. They appeared scattered, yet connected, forming a quiet network of instability beneath the city. Each site alone could be dismissed as an anomaly. Together, they suggested a deeper disturbance, one that moved without announcing itself. Jerusalem has always been a city built layer upon layer, each generation resting upon the remnants of another. Now, those layers themselves seemed to shift, not in chaos, but in a manner that felt measured, deliberate. As the ground adjusted in places where it was never expected to move, a silent question emerged. If even what was considered immovable can no longer be trusted, what foundation truly remains secure? Could it be that these places are considered safe because they are sealed off? However, looking at recent events, this assertion would likely become unfounded. Without considering what has happened at the Eastern Gate recently, the movement beneath the city does not stop at the roads. It travels quietly toward the walls. Along the eastern gate, inspectors begin to notice changes too slight to alarm, yet too consistent to dismiss. Hairline cracks appear where stone had long resisted time. Mortar shows signs of strain, not failure. The structure remains intact, but tension is now visible on its surface. What draws attention is not damage, but response. The gate does not open. It does not fracture. It does not yield. It absorbs. Witnesses report low, resonant sounds emerging at irregular intervals, deep and hollow, carrying through the stone like air, forced through a narrow chamber. Some describe them as trumpet-like, not in volume, but in tone, prolonged, directional, and unsettling in their restraint. Engineers search for mechanical explanations, pressure gradients, subsurface shifts transferring force into the foundation. Yet the data offers no clear source of release. Stress is present, but there is no outlet. The gate remains sealed. For those familiar with scriptures, the image is difficult to ignore. Jerusalem does not witness an opening. It witnesses resistance. And in that sealed response, the city is reminded. Not every movement is meant to pass through. Some are meant to be held. Some people immediately recalled what had just happened at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and vaguely realized that the signs, when combined with the fire, which shouldn't have been present at the Church of the Holy Tomb recently, seemed to be on the same thread. Within one of the most watched and most prayed-in spaces on earth, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it emerged quietly. During moments of gathered prayer, witnesses reported candles igniting without contact, flame appearing where no hand had moved and no spark could be traced. There was no electrical failure, no visible ignition source, no sudden rush of air. The fire simply appeared, steady and contained, as though it had been waiting. In the first minutes, something unmistakable occurred. The flames did not behave as fire should. Skin did not blister. Hair did not singe. Fabric did not darken. Several present reached out instinctively, some in disbelief, others in reverence, and touched the fire directly. There were no injuries. Beards passed through flame without curling. Sleeves brushed against it without catching. The heat was present, yet harm was absent. Only later did the fire transition. Gradually, without warning, it began to burn as fire normally does. Candles behaved like candles again. Heat returned its consequences. What had been safe moments before became dangerous. The shift itself unsettled many more than the flame ever had. Emotional responses spread unevenly through the church. Some stood frozen in awe. Others withdrew in fear. A few wept openly. Ancient language, long buried beneath modern caution, resurfaced unprompted. Words like "holy fire" appeared not as declarations, but as whispered questions, spoken with uncertainty rather than certainty. Yet the fire was not the only change. Alongside, it came an overwhelming stillness. Ambient sound faded as if absorbed. Footsteps softened. Voices dropped without instruction. In spaces that moments earlier had been crowded and alive with motion, silence settled. Not empty silence, but full, heavy, attentive. Many described the same sensation independently. Not the feeling of watching something, but of being watched. Not fear alone, and not peace alone, but a mingling of both that resisted clear definition. There was no visible form, no wings, no figure, no voice. And yet, the emotional impact was strikingly consistent. The word visitation began to circulate not as theology, but as instinct. Witnesses reached for biblical parallels without being able to complete them. Ancient encounters came to mind. Moments where messengers appeared, where fear preceded speech, where presence itself overwhelmed explanation. What unsettled observers most was not what happened, but what did not. No message was spoken, no command was given, no interpretation was offered. There was only presence. And then, withdrawal. In the absence of words, the meaning remained unresolved. If this was a sign, it refused to explain itself. If it was a warning, it carried no instructions. And if it was a visitation, it left behind no proof, only memory, and a lingering awareness that something had passed through without needing permission to be seen. In Jerusalem, where history has always been measured by what enters and what departs, this moment left a quieter disturbance. The realization that not all encounters are meant to teach, persuade, or comfort. Some are meant simply to be felt. And in that feeling, the unanswered question remains: when fire does not burn, and presence does not speak, what exactly is being revealed? Perhaps from the sky above the holy city. It appears above it. In broad daylight, witnesses begin reporting two intense points of light suspended over the city, bright enough to resemble small suns, yet unmoving, unblinking. They do not arc across the sky, nor do they fade with passing clouds. They remain fixed, holding position with a precision that defies common aerial explanation. Air traffic records offer no match. No contrails. No sound. No thermal signature consistent with known craft. At night, the phenomenon shifts. Over the Temple Mount, a vertical column of white light becomes visible, narrow, sharply defined, extending upward as if anchored to a single point on the earth and reaching into unseen height. It does not flicker like flame or scatter like reflection. It stands. Observers note its stillness. Too stable to be atmospheric, too precise to be accidental. The light does not illuminate the surrounding sky so much as it claims a line through it, turning space into structure. Authorities investigate. Scientists suggest rare optical alignments, plasma effects, or misinterpreted celestial events. Yet none can explain why the column holds its position night after night, unaffected by wind, cloud cover, or shifting conditions. The sky, once assumed to be a passive backdrop, no longer behaves that way. It responds. The words recorded centuries ago surface quietly among scholars and theologians. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Luke 21:25. Not signs of chaos, but of attention. These lights do not move to threaten. They do not descend to strike. They remain watchful, measured, deliberate. Jerusalem has always been a city where heaven and earth appear closer than elsewhere. Now, the distance feels thinner still. The ground has shifted without shaking. The gate has borne pressure without opening. And now the sky itself seems to take part not as scenery, but as witness. Something is aligning, and it is no longer confined to the surface of the world. There comes a point when signs no longer announce themselves with force. They no longer compete for attention. They no longer scream. Instead, they begin to align. What has unfolded in Jerusalem does not resemble a single disaster, nor a single miracle. The ground moved without an earthquake. Stone shifted without rupture. A sealed gate bore pressure without opening. Light appeared where light should not behave. Fire burned without harm. Presence was felt without form. Each event, on its own, invites explanation. Together, they resist it. Set during 70 years of Jewish captivity, the Book of Daniel presents visions of God's rule and redemptive plan for those in exile. The year is 538 BC, 9-1, and Daniel, the prophet and former prime minister of Babylon, wears sackcloth and ashes. He cries out to God in prayer, fasting, and confession.